So welcome back to AATV. I'm your host Tom Anvil Hibberd, coming back to you with another one of our very popular loadout videos. This time we're looking at the British soldier in the 90s. We're going to show kit from the early 90s through the introduction of Soldier 95 and right up to the turn of the century. We're going to particularly focus on British troops in the Balkans in the UN peacekeeping operations in 1999, and we've used reference photos from that era to give us some ideas. So as ever, when you're watching our videos, please bear in mind these are intended for Airsoft skirmishers and for Airsoft milsims. They're not intended for living history or reenactment purposes. We will make some errors because of that, and some accommodations for price and cost and availability. As always, with our loadout videos, we're not too worried about the eye pro, the gloves and the boots that you wear. We consider those PPE, and you really should choose what's appropriate for you. So let's start with the basics. And today we're starting with Soldier 95, which was introduced in the mid-90s and was a top to bottom, underpants to winter coat, complete issue of kit for the soldier. Considered by many soldiers to be the first fit for purpose issued clothing by the British Army. So these trousers are quite a departure from some previous versions. They're much lighter weight. Some soldiers thought they were slightly too fragile, especially around the knees. Big change is the Canadian buttons, which is much easier for a soldier to replace in the field, particularly a 17, 18-year-old without any sewing skills. Two big mat pockets, one on each side, hand warmer pockets, and one seat pocket. In a departure from the 1980s video we did, we've lost the puttees and the trousers are now bloused further down the boot. So the trousers came paired with what was called a lightweight combat jacket. Really a shirt, wasn't really used in the field. Most people just wore it around barracks. What most people used in the field, or they had to use in the field, was the smock. Again, this is lighter weight, it's not as lined as some previous smocks, and has a multitude of useful pockets to put stuff in. So this particular smock is a later version from around the early 2000s, and isn't quite the same as the ones issued in the mid-90s, but for Airsoft, it doesn't really matter. So this jacket, or smock, has loads of features. We have two breast pockets, absolutely massive, go all the way to the armpits. We have a rank slide, so now rank is only really worn in the centre point, makes it much easier for people to see, in case you're wondering what this is. Again, we've got the Canadian buttons holding everything together. We have a hood, and no one ever really used hoods, and they were nice and tidily rolled up behind the neck. And we also have 4 cargo pockets, 2 lower, 2 upper, and they have bellows, so they can take an absolute load of kit. Footwear wise, in the early 90s, it would have been boots combat high, like we've shown you in the earlier Falklands video or the 1980s video. These were superseded by the assault boot with speed laces. However, a lot of soldiers used private purchase boots. These ones are my more modern lowers, but they're fairly representative of some of the more Gucci or Ali boots used at the time. And in general, a good solid black leather boot, you'll be absolutely fine for airsoft purposes. And underneath my smock, I've got a British Army issue green t-shirt. It's actually called a vest, but most civilians would call it a t-shirt. So cost-wise, this is one of the cheapest loadouts you can do. Notwithstanding the boots, my trousers, t-shirt and smock cost me less than £50. You'd probably get me even cheaper than that if you shop around. So to finish off our basic loadout, I've got this issue British Army NI rig. Absolutely fantastic. Carries enough for a day skirmishing or enough for patrolling at a milsim. It's also super cheap. This was 15 quid from my local army surplus store. Carries 2 or 3 mags in each pouch. You've got 2 big utility pouches, and you can even get inside as well to keep any notes or secure documents. I'm not going to wear a beret for this loadout video. I haven't earned it. I don't think I should be wearing it. So we're going to move on to a couple of other things. The helmet issued at the time was the Mark 6. This one has a woodland cover and a popular inner tube modification to make sure the helmet cover doesn't come off. We also have an extra black elastic strap for use when you've got a respirator on. We've covered these extensively in our recent video on helmets, so if you want to know more, have a look at that. However, for airsoft use, a ballistic helmet is really heavy, and unless you're playing at a game or event which uses rules for armour, I'd probably recommend that in fact you go for a jungle hat or boonie hat instead. This is a slightly more alley cut down version. It's in a modern DPM, but again, absolutely fine for airsoft. So we're going to move on a little bit from the issue kit. And even though Soldier 95 had been issued, some soldiers were still hanging on to the earlier, more Ali or Gucci kit. Also, if you're doing a soldier from the early 90s, obviously Soldier 95 wasn't around at that point. So for this section, I'm wearing a set of tropical trousers and a windproof smock. These were very popular with the soldiers. They were very lightweight. They blocked a bit of the wind, and most importantly, when you got wet, they dried out really fast. And as most infantry soldiers will be able to tell you, they'll spend a lot of the time soaked through. So being able to dry out fast is really important. It was also a bit of a sign of being an experienced soldier. And soldiers, like the rest of us, follow fashion as well. So this was an extremely fashionable set of kit in the 90s and the early 2000s. So these tropical trousers, these are a 90s pair, early 90s dated. The really early 70s and 80s ones are brighter. By this point, they started to tone down a bit. They are still brighter, even this washed out pair, than the issue DPM at the time. And that's because when they get wet and they darken down with the water, they still retain their camouflage pattern. They're made of a synthetic blend, which again dries faster, and they're nice and lightweight and breathable. So the windproof smock was issued to troops going to cold and snowy places as an oversuit for the rest of their uniform. However, so many soldiers liked it that they started wearing it by itself instead of their issue smocks anyway. And again, it's lighter than the issue smock, still has plenty of carrying capability with big bellows pockets on the front. And again, it has a rolled up hood to keep it nice and tidy. So this particular example of a windproof smock dates from the early 90s. It's got loads of soldier fixes, like the tailored on compass pouch, tape over the buttons to stop reflections, operational flag. It did also come with some unit patches and badges of rank. However, because it's an historical artefact, I'm loath to cut them off, but I don't want to be on camera wearing rank and insignia belonging to a unit which I'm not part of. So I've just taped them over for the purposes of the video. Cost-wise, these are surprisingly cheap. If you shop around, my Tropics were 25 quid from Anchor Surplus, and I got this on eBay for a bargain, £25, including shipping. So if you want an alternative for a windproof smock, maybe because it's summer and it's getting a bit hot, you can get a tropical shirt as well. Again, this one is dated to the early 90s, was about £20, and makes a great alternative to a windproof smock if it gets hot. Now we're going to cover this in more detail in a later loadout video. I've got one which will use this really, really well. Conversely, if your game is taking part in the winter or the autumn, or even if it gets chilly at night, you can pick up an issue NORGIE, Norwegian shirt. These are actually, I really like these anyway. They're really, really comfy, and they'll add a little bit of warmth for very little bulk. And again, you can get these super cheap. These were a private purchase item in the 80s. By the 90s, they were being issued by the British Army, who recognised that these were such a good item. So in the 90s, webbing or load-bearing equipment had come a long way since the days of 58 in the 80s. And now we've moved on to PLCE, personal load carrying equipment. We talk a lot more about this in some of our previous videos, and we'll probably go over it again soon, because we've made some updates to our kit. So you've noticed that I've got a set of green PLCE. This was in the early days, in the early 90s. And I'm wearing this, one, to represent an early 90s soldier, and two, because it better shows up against the rest of my DPM kit, otherwise it would all blend in. PLCE consists of a set of different pouches that attach to a common belt with a yoke, but soldiers would mix and match to the heart's content with their issue kit and private purchases and whatever they could snaffle. So this is my set. I've got the left and right ammo pouches. These are the really early introduction pattern. 2 water bottle pouches and 2 utility pouches. The doctrine had changed a bit since 58. If you saw Gadget's Falklands video, he's carrying the world in his webbing, with bum rolls and poncho rolls and his NBC kit and his kidney pouches and everything else. And soldiers were now expected to carry less on their webbing, and the items that weren't in their webbing were now in a patrol pack. However, before the patrol pack became really common, soldiers were expected, and even was designed, to take the side pouches off their PLC Bergens, attach them onto a separate yoke and use that as a patrol pack. They'd have the NBC kit in one pouch and their food rations and shelter in another pouch. So to look soldierly, really, you should tape up any loose ends of webbing to stop them flapping around. This set has a hip belt on to give me some added comfort, and I also have a bungee and a utility strap holding all the pouches together at the back to stop them flapping around. Now, we've talked about being alley in a previous episode. We're now about as alley as it can get in the late 90s. So I'm wearing this South African issue M83 battle jacket. Now, depending on the unit, you may not have been able to get away with wearing one of these, but certainly for airsoft purposes, we can. So because we're particularly basing this loadout on the British in the Balkans, in quite a number of photos you can see soldiers wearing these. So it's a really good choice for this period of time. It's also extremely comfortable. Comes with probably too many pockets. You might get pocket eyes trying to fill them all. But it's a practical, hard-wearing, really useful bit of kit. Also fantastic for other loadouts, particularly mercenaries and the African bush wars. So you can pick up repros for 20-30 quid. I probably wouldn't if you want to get particularly accurate loadout. You want to get one of these ones in the Nutria Brown that the South Africans issued. Now these can vary anywhere between about 75 to 125 pounds, depending on condition and if you get lucky on eBay. But again, not a lot of money compared to a lot of airsoft kit. Well, really, if you want to do a basic infantry soldier, you've only really got one choice, and that's an L85. This example is an L85A2, which didn't really come into the early 2000s. There are L85A1s on the market. They're most commonly distinguished by having a round cocking lever and not this teardrop shaped one on the A2. For an infantry loadout, certainly in a European theatre, you really want a SUSAT sight. If you're doing a jungle warfare, they tend to take these off and put on the carry handle iron sights instead. So you really don't want to use an L85. There are a couple of alternatives, basically M16 variants or AR-15s. This one is an M16A2. If you're doing an early 90s loadout, you could probably use an M16A1. Now these weren't that common, but they were issued to battalion and brigade reconnaissance teams, special forces, and units like the Paras Pathfinders. If you fancy going for a sniper loadout, you could use something like an L96, and again there's loads of those on the airsoft market. So thanks for watching this episode of AATV, looking at the British soldier loadout from the 90s. As ever, would love to hear from you. Did you wear any of this kit? What did you think of it? What modifications did you make? Bear in mind, however, we're not the Imperial War Museum. We are airsofters. We will make mistakes, so please keep the comments as constructive as you can. If you'd like to help AATV stay as independent as possible, you can join our Patreon scheme. If you want to make a one-off financial contribution, you can always buy one of our awesome t-shirts from our Teespring store. As ever, please like, share and subscribe. Ding the bell to receive notifications whenever we go live. Most importantly, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.